In 2024, we got a film that, while divisive to some, tried to take an honest look at the inner life of a struggling, exotic dancer at a turbulent crossroad in her life. That film is, of course, Lola! In all seriousness, I know I'm not the first person who has said this, but it is so interesting to me that we got both Lola and Anora, films about sex workers, named after their lead characters, and seeing one of them garner critical praise and the other being one of the worst films of the year. So I want to compare the two and how they handle their subject matter, because the differences are night and day. Going to be talking about both these movies in details, spoilers and all. Let's do this. Alright internet, I want to start by quickly walking us through the plots of these films before digging deeper into the details of them. I don't usually break down plots in my videos, I assume the watcher has already seen the things I'm talking about, but I think it is really valuable for this, in no small part because I'm hoping it saves you having to watch Lola if you haven't already. So you're welcome. Lola begins with the titular character's status quo being set up. She works at a pharmacy with her best friend in the day and as an exotic dancer at night. She's trying to save up money to get her and her sibling Arlo out of their abusive Christian mother's home. We set up early how important taking care of Arlo is to Lola. She accepts that Arlo, who is trans or some other form of genderqueer never directly stated in the film, and it is something that their mother refuses to acknowledge as true. She tries to ignore it because she doesn't accept it. We get details of the life of our titular character, her best friend and coworker Babina, who Lola and Arlo eventually move in with after leaving home, Lola's cocaine addiction, fueled by her ex-boyfriend trying to win her back, and her work at the club, where she is generally unwilling to go into the back rooms with clients because, as we find out, she is a virgin. And I think that could have been the most interesting dynamic of the film, her dealing with the balance between her current reality as an exotic dancer and her past being raised in a religious household. Instead, there are small details set up in overly short, bluntly expositional dialogue scenes that don't go into much depth about it. This is a pattern with the film that we will go over more. Roughly an hour into the film's 83-minute runtime, Arlo is taken by their mother back home, long hair forcibly cut into a tight, traditionally boyish look, and then they run away, getting hit by a car and dying. This causes Lola to tailspin harder into her addiction, only to decide that she needs to get clean so that way she can raise her own child. Oh, right, I should mention she is pregnant because her mother's boyfriend assaults her when she goes back to the house to get some of her extra clothes and Arlo's dog. It feels, in the moment, like one of many random happenings in the movie that feels brushed over, only to become the driving point of the last act of the movie. And I'm not saying we need a longer, more brutal scene of the depiction. I actually think its quick, sudden happenings is an interesting choice, but the movie spends as much time showing Lola's emotional state after the fact as we do her being fired from the store she works at for stealing. These are just bad things happening to our protagonist that she must endure without much attention given to how they fit into the larger whole. The third act of this film, we see characters telling Lola how strong she is, calling her a survivor.
I'm not a survivor when I see what
But we never really see that. We see her getting fired for stealing, but she doesn't try to fight to keep her job, despite her needing to save money to bring Arlo to Dallas to go to a fancy school. We don't see her stress about lost income, look for other jobs, or even see how she gets the job back in the final parts of the film. This is one of the major issues with the film. It tries to put tragedy after tragedy on its lead without ever really giving those moments any weight. The fights between Lola and her mother are so short, where they quickly state the issues they have with each other and essentially just back off. Speaking to someone I know who has been in a toxic household growing up, that is never how it goes. Back and forths go on extremely long, circling the issues at the core over and over and over again. So, while Lola refuses to linger on its moments, Anora goes in the opposite direction, and I think we should talk about that film now. Anora also begins setting up the status quo of its protagonist, but goes in a much different direction. Instead of trying to posit Annie as downtrodden and forced into her life as an exotic dancer, they position it as her choice. And while it may be a choice built out of circumstance, being as she definitely isn't shown to be well off by any means, she is clearly in control of her own life, while Lola feels more like she is drifting from one tragedy to another. The first act of Anora follows her whirlwind romance with Vanya, the son of rich parents who's visiting New York from Russia. Well, it begins as a transactional relationship where Vanya showers her with gifts and trips. He wins Annie over with his seemingly genuine, boyish charm, and they decide to get married in Vegas. Then their life comes crashing down when Vanya's parents find out about the marriage and send their henchmen to force the couple to get their marriage annulled. Vanya runs away, and the bulk of the movie then follows Annie and the goons dealing with each other while trying to find the missing kid. Oh my god, I'm at an age where I'm referring to a 21-year-old as a kid. From the moment Vanya runs, the tone and craft of the film changes. While the first act has plenty of montages quickly showing us the glitz and glamour of the central relationship. While there are scenes within that first act that slow down between montages, letting us take a deeper look at the characters in those moments, the second act stretches out scenes as long as they will go. From the thugs manhandling Annie, her fears on them brutalizing her, and her attempts to escape, all the way through scene after scene after scene of them going to multiple places, trying to find Vanya and interrogating his friends, up until the end, scenes go on for so long, much longer than we are used to in most films. I've seen people criticize this as being overlong or padding out scenes, but I think the length of these scenes do a great job in putting us in the mental state of the characters. Sitting in a theater watching scene after scene of Vanya's godfather Toros yelling at people to help him find the boy, repeatedly coming up empty-handed, helps us feel the frustration and fatigue these characters are going through. This is a great way to use the formal side of filmmaking to enhance the content of it. Compare that to the main point I've made so far about Lola, where scenes are so short we can't connect with them. They feel more like a checklist of traumas the script is trying to get us through in 83 minutes. I like when a movie can tell its story in a short runtime, but it needs to do so in a way that feels authentic and compelling. Anora is almost twice as long as Lola, but covers what feels like about half the amount of events if you were to list them both out, but uses that time so much better to tell its story. Anora ends with having to return to her old life after realizing that Vanya never really cared for her and was just an immature boy acting rebellious. Annie is broken up by the way she is treated, a representation of how the rich view the lower class and sex workers as a whole. Meanwhile, Lola ends with bad voiceover about how she's managed to make a life for herself. We also don't get a mention of Arlo at all after their death, the death that causes Lola to spiral out. Despite her love for Arlo being the driving force of the first 2/3 of the film, they are dropped to focus on other parts of her life. The closest the film comes to mentioning them again is how in the final shot, we see Lola's daughter wearing the same necklace Arlo wore, but that is it. As a film, Lola is a textbook example of trauma porn and poverty tourism, leaning hard into tropes like bury your gaze and the token black friend as shallow motivators and supporters for the main character. Babina takes in Lola and Arlo when they escape their mother, reads what to expect when you're expecting to Lola, and clearly got her old job back for her, and then just tearfully says goodbye when Lola leaves to start her new life. We never get a real look at Babina as a person, despite both her and her mother Pearl being pivotal to Lola's story. On the other hand, we have Anora's supporting characters having plenty of depth. Toros and the goons, Igor and Garnik, being characters who could have been basic, stock, nothing, but instead feel like real people who each feels distinct from one another. And while a lot of that can be credited to the dynamic performances of the actors, it is more than just that. Raven Goodwin, who plays Babina, is doing the best she can to breathe life into that role, but she's only working with so much. You could say that about most of the supporting players in Lola. They are trying with what they have. The supporting players in Anora have a lot on the page and plenty of screen time to develop and evolve dynamics between themselves and Annie. They get moments to be threatening, vulnerable, and more than anything else, funny. Anora rides the fine line of comedy and drama, injecting moments of screwball humor into what can be very dark scenes. I think it does a good job of doing so without belittling moments like when the goons tried to stop Annie from running, but I know this isn't a universal point of view. That said, the film is at least carving a unique identity for itself, whether it worked for you or not. It isn't as paint by numbers as Lola comes off. It bears repeating how much the events feel like a checklist being ticked off, all the cliches of a serious drama being done by someone trying to be viewed as a serious artist. I haven't talked about the filmmakers behind these movies yet, but I think now is the time to get into it. Lola was written and directed by the star Nicola Peltz Beckham, best known as Katara in the 2010 Last Airbender adaptation. She is the daughter of a billionaire businessman and married into the Beckham family. She is as far away from the kind of life she's trying to depict in her directorial debut, a fact that she is well aware of.
I wanted to write a story from a person's perspective and another point of view that was not my personal view and not my upbringing. I am an actress and my dream is to get to look at the world from different perspectives.
And I don't think that she set out with the goal of being exploitative of the lower class, but I do think she approached the writing of the script more from the want to give herself a dramatic role to perform instead of trying to portray a class authentically. You can see that by the amount of time she put into the writing the script that she did when she was just 23 years old.
I did not sleep for 3 days. I have screenshots of 4:50 a.m., just me writing. When I started putting my thoughts down, they just wouldn't stop.
Now, I've written plenty of screenplays in my early 20s, and we all know how those turned out. Oh wait, we don't, because I never got to make them, because they are bad. Now, obviously she must have rewritten the script from that original draft in the 6 years between then and her making it, but the final movie does still feel like a stream of consciousness draft that it began as, with no real structure or flow. Compare that to writer-director Sean Baker, who, while not coming from a background of poverty either, looks to find the authenticity and humanity in his subjects. Sidebar, I'm not going to be touching on any of the rumors I've heard of his personal politics, because yikes. But also because I don't think it's pertinent to the discussion. We're just going to be analyzing his work and what he has said on his work. Baker's authentic portrayal is achieved by extensively researching and communicating with the people in the fringe communities he is trying to depict. Baker, who has made a career depicting marginalized communities, especially sex workers, across his filmography, has often been the subject of criticism on the idea of poverty porn. And while I understand that there is an inevitable amount of exploitation that arises from mining communities you aren't a part of for art, intent needs to be considered. Baker appears to approach his films with a curiosity and empathy, and wanting to tell stories that he thinks people need to hear.
I'm trying to flesh out characters within, and perhaps characters who are doing their best to survive in this crazy country, in which there is a major class divide. I think most of the problems that we have in this country right now come down to class, meaning economic division between people.
So I mentioned how in that interview, Nicola Peltz Beckham revealed that she wrote the script to Lola in a stream of consciousness style without any structure or outlining in place. You can really tell watching it. There is very little setup and payoff, and little from the first half of the film feels like it affects the end. And while you could argue that that makes it more true to life, it makes it all feel very disconnected and not what you want from a viewing experience. You can make slice of life, glimpsey type movies that do feel like the individual moments resonate with each other better. For example, you don't even really know that Malachi and Lola have a prior relationship before finding out that he cheated on her, and that's probably because prior to it being written, they really weren't. It feels more like they are interested in each other in that way people are without prior baggage. It's a weird choice. The last point I want to cover in this video is comparing how the titular characters of the movies are portrayed, both by their actors and by the film at large. Because I do think that their physical depiction in terms of outfits does say a lot about the films as a whole. Just wanted to take a second to quickly plug that the channel has a membership option if you are interested in supporting the channel more directly. This year, I plan on putting out a lot of exclusive and early access stuff to members of the channel, but to do that, we do need members. So if you can, join today. Now back to the video. In terms of fashion, Annie has a slew of cute dresses and outfits throughout Anora that help both show us a side of her personality through her taste, but also her brand and her line of work. Small details like the glitter in her hair are both conveying that she is cute and fun, but I'm also sure catches the eye of patrons in the club in a subtle but impactful way. This presentational aspect of her is reflected in her personality as well. She's very bubbly at work, code switching as needed to get clients to pull out money, all that. Meanwhile, in her home life, while she is more dressed down and comfortable, there is still an air of presentation to her. Yeah, she wants to look good for her new husband, but also for herself. That can be because Annie as a character is proud of herself and her work, unlike how sex workers in media have been depicted in prior decades. She also has a gutter mouth and a short temper, set up in early scenes getting into fights with another dancer, and then paying off when she is trying to defend herself from the goons. It is great and really humanizes her because Anora as a film is about people and not trying to use characters as props for ideas like some movies. I almost forgot to mention just the fact that when they go out on their long escapade, she chooses to wear the jacket that Vanya gave her. Not because it is the right coat for the situation, it is way too cold for that, but she is presenting herself as who she identifies at this point, his wife. Also, if you think I am overanalyzing the wardrobe choices in this movie, you clearly haven't seen my video on media literacy. Don't worry, I'll link it below. Lola, as a character, has what I would call a more shallow depiction. My partner, who watched this film with me, would call her a boring, lifeless insult, so take that as you will. Lola the film, as far as I can tell, is set in the 90s, but it is hard to say. A lot of that fashion is back in now, so at first the costuming just comes off as throwback trendy. It wasn't until like halfway through when I realized that there were no cell phones, and we do also, at 1 or 2 points in the film, see a Discman, but those could also be shorthands for poverty. I kind of like the film not spoon-feeding that it is a period piece to us. I think that would work really well in a better film, but here it just adds to the laundry list of what feels like incomplete thoughts. The main point I want to make in regards to Lola's presentation is her makeup. She is in full glam in pretty much every scene, something I do think makes sense for the character. We even have a scene of her showing Arlo how to do makeup like her, so there is an intentional character point to it. But the issue arises when it comes to her sleeping in it. Not because I think she wouldn't, I actually like the idea of her not bothering to take it off before going to bed as a fun touch that could be highlighted more. It is the fact that she wakes up with it still looking perfect that highlights the issue. Her waking up with perfect glam tells me that the focus on the film is more on the aesthetic beauty than the authentic experience. Not to say that aesthetics don't matter, there are plenty of movies where that is a selling point for them, but when a movie is trying to pass off as realistic and grounded, but the focus is on the beauty of the central character, you have missed the mark. This translates directly to Katara's performance in the film. I am not the first person to say this, but even in Lola's lowest moments, there is a beautification and romanticization of her sadness. It is #SadGirlTumblr, and that is everything you need to know about Lola as a movie, and that's why I left it for the end of the 19-minute video. Lola honestly isn't much of a film in terms of its depths, but I do think it is problematic in how it handles this romanticization because of how it flattens the experiences of marginalized groups for the sake of aesthetics. I want to leave this off with another quote from that Sean Baker interview because I think it sums up my feelings on all of this pretty well.
Part of the reason that they are on the fringes and are unrepresented is because they're not being represented. I think the more that our stories are told about people on the margins, the less they will be on the margins, simply because, hopefully, it'll lead to a greater acceptance, a greater interest, a greater empathy.
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video more than I enjoyed Lola. It was so bad, honestly. Huge thanks to my friend David and my partner Sam for lending me their voices for this video. Love you guys so much. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Maybe share it with someone who'd like it. Seriously, all that stuff helps and means a lot to me, so thank you. And until next time, have a good one.